Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today as we mark the final day of Sexual Assault Awareness Month and discuss the critical need to pass an important piece of legislation called the ALERT Act. I want to thank Alyssa Slotkin for leading the introduction of this bill in the House of Representatives. She's been a real champion on this issue, and we look forward to working with her in the House. She's a great partner. I'd also like to recognize Senator Cornyn, the co-sponsor here in the Senate, who I worked with last year as well as we were starting this process here in the Senate, as well as my colleague, Senator Stabenow. I would also like to thank Representatives Upton and Mitchell for being here today and being engaged in a bipartisan, bicameral effort to get this passed. And I also want to thank Deborah Vagans from the American Association of University Women for joining us as well. This is an issue that impacts not just survivors in Michigan, but really all across our country. One thing that's clear to me, especially in my meeting with the survivors of the abuse that was inflicted upon them by Larry Nassar, is that his sentencing is certainly not the end in any way to addressing this ordeal for them and for countless other survivors all across our country. We need to address the flaws in the system that have clearly failed to protect young people. I was certainly truly inspired by the survivors, as I'm sure everybody up here was, and I've met them and I saw firsthand their courage and their commitment to justice. It was their courage that has inspired many others to come forward who are victims of sexual abuse, and it's their courage that will help stop predators from abusing more young athletes. In Michigan, unfortunately, there is still a serious trust deficit between MSU and the survivors, the student body and the faculty and Michigan families. I'm encouraged that the Board of Trustees fired Acting President Mr. Engler earlier this year as they embark on a search for a new president. It was clear that Mr. Engler's lack of empathy toward the survivors has made them feel disrespected and dismissed. With him gone, the healing process can move forward and begin, and that should have happened, of course, a long time ago. But ultimately, we need to make sure that there is no excuse used by the top officials at the university, especially the excuse that I didn't know. That can never, ever be used as an excuse for permitting monstrous abuse to come forward and watch officials and see our officials not stand up for the students that they are entrusted to support. In the case of Larry Nassar, university leaders complained that they were unaware of reports despite the involvement of the Title IX office on campus. For example, Dr. Simon acknowledged last year during my questioning when she testified before the Senate that she did not read the 2014 Title IX report documenting allegations of misconduct by Dr. Nassar, and she even added it wasn't normal for her to review the reports of these kinds of allegations. Well, that fact is simply unacceptable. And that's why Congress needs to pass our bipartisan and bicameral legislation. Our bill is very straightforward. It will require university leaders to certify that they have reviewed any reports of sexual abuse perpetrated by university employees to the Department of Education. I think it is clear to all the sponsors that are standing up here with me today that if a university employee, someone who is entrusted with the well-being of students on that campus, has a Title IX case before them or involving them, a university president or a trustee, at least a university president and at least one trustee needs to be aware of it. We need to learn the truth so that those who are enabled and those who protected Dr. Nassar are held accountable for our children, for our students, to make sure that they are never, ever abused again by someone as monstrous as Dr. Nassar. I'm pleased to have bipartisan, bicameral effort to address this issue, and I'm hopeful that we can advance this legislation in the Senate and in the House and do it as soon as possible. And that's why I want to welcome co-sponsor and a great champion on this issue, Senator Cornyn from Texas.
Well, thank you, Senator Peters and Senator Stabenow, my colleagues in the Senate. Thanks to our colleagues over in the House for their hard work on this very important and sensitive issue. Some of the most disturbing reports of sexual violence and abuse are those that take place on our college campuses. I know as a father of two daughters, when I sent my daughters off to school, the last thing I wanted is for them to become a victim of some sexual assault or abuse that administrators and the faculty turned a blind eye to. We know that's what has happened, despite the fact that official Title IX or external investigations have been conducted at a number of places. That's why we need the ALERT Act. The goal of this bill, as Senator Peters says, is to improve accountability. University officials will no longer be able to turn a blind eye to these sorts of serious allegations. With this bill, we put a spotlight where it deserves to be placed on school leadership, and we expect them to do their job, and if they're going to qualify under Title IX. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on this issue, and as you can see, it does enjoy bipartisan, bicameral support. That's the way we actually get things done around here, and that's what we will do here, so we can get this important bill to the President's desk as soon as possible. With that, let me turn the floor over to our friend and colleague, Senator Stabenow.
Well, thank you, Senator Cornyn and Senator Peters, for your wonderful leadership. My House colleagues, Congresswoman Slotkin, thank you for your leadership, and Congressman Upton and Congressman Mitchell. Deborah, thank you for being here with AAUW. This is so important, and we in Michigan really have felt this deeply because of what has happened at our alma mater. And so we feel a special responsibility to stand up for the student athletes and other students that are involved. Our colleges and universities have no greater responsibility than to keep young people safe, period. All of us who have sent our children to college expect that. Every parent should expect that. Every young person should expect that. And when they fail to meet that responsibility, they must be held accountable. This legislation is an important way to do that. I've had the honor to meet with many young people, those who are survivors, both here in DC as well as at home in Michigan. And every time I've spoken to them, I am struck by their strength and by their bravery. And I'm also struck by the fact that they are focused on making a difference. They want to be involved. They want to be part of the solution and part of the future and making things better and making sure that young athletes never experience what they had to endure. With this legislation, we are joining their fight as their partners. It will help ensure that universities take sexual abuse seriously and that their leadership is held accountable. Many of the survivors have mentioned how incredibly alone they felt back at that time. We're here today to let them know they are not alone now. So I want to turn now to our lead sponsor, Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. Thank you so much for all that you're doing with this legislation and representing my alma mater so well.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Senator Peters, Senator Stabenow, Senator Cornyn, and Congressman Upton and Mitchell for demonstrating really such wonderful bipartisan leadership. I'm extremely proud to introduce the ALERT Act today in the House. Most importantly, I want to thank the survivor advocates who have demonstrated real leadership and real courage in calling us to act. It's my privilege to represent the district that includes Michigan State University, one of America's great universities. Countless students, faculty, staff, and campus leaders have responded to the revelations of horrific crimes on campus with bravery and determination and wisdom. And for that reason, I feel a special responsibility as their representative in Congress to answer their courage with action. It is our responsibility in answering that call to put forward things like the ALERT Act. It's about accountability, this piece of legislation. The accountability of leaders on our nation's campuses to the students they are supposed to serve. With this legislation, we would require that senior university leaders are made aware of sexual assault complaints against any university employee. In doing so, we will ensure that no university president, chancellor, board of trustees can ever respond to news of a sexual predator on their campus with a shrug and say, I didn't know, no one told me, and I couldn't have helped it. We must have university leaders who act to protect the safety and health of their students. I was very pleased that I was able to seek interim or support and interest and advocacy from interim president at Michigan State University, Satish Utpa, as well as the president of Oakland University, Ora Peskovitz. They specifically weighed in on this legislation. They're both pleased and both supportive. It's particularly important to me today that we are doing this in a bipartisan fashion. With my conversations with survivor advocates, they have specifically emphasized that they do not want this issue to be political and be part of Washington's partisan battles. They are calling on us not to score political points, but protect safety and welfare of young people, and I really thank my colleagues for joining us today. By passing the ALERT Act, we can take one step forward in establishing accountability on our campuses. For me, this is just a first step, not my last, on the legislation that we're going to put forward to improve Title IX. I've had the privilege of meeting dozens and dozens of survivors and advocates in the district and outside, including a conversation we just had in the past 10 days on sexual assault earlier this month. We discussed how much more there is to do. I must say that I'm committed to doing all I can to communicate those stories to the senior leaders who need to hear them. And for that reason, I'm very pleased to have the chance to meet with Secretary Betsy DeVos, who has graciously agreed to speak with me in my office next week. Again, I'm proud to stand with my bipartisan, bicameral counterparts and urge all my colleagues to support the ALERT Act. Thanks very much. And now, Congressman Upton.
I'm Fred Upton, and for me, this is personal, particularly for those of us from Michigan. Many of us know somebody who was a victim. Thank God they spoke out, and now we have to be on their team. This has to be exposed, and we have to have real penalties for those that violate the standard that all of us want to have for all of our universities. For me, I'm, first of all, very grateful for Alyssa and for Gary and Debbie and John and Paul and the different groups. It has to be bipartisan for us to get this thing done. It is. I also want to applaud our universities. For me, I represent Southwest Michigan. I've reached out to all of our universities and community colleges. They are in full support of what we're doing today. They really embrace this legislation. And the quicker we can get it introduced, it'll be introduced in the House today, and the more co-sponsors we can get on both sides of the aisle, the better chance we have to go into our respective leaderships and say, let's get this on the floor. Let's put it up in the House under suspension, so it requires a 2/3 vote, but you don't have to worry about perhaps the normal committee process to get it done, and actually get the bill to the president where we can join him and maybe even get a pen for something that is long overdue. One of the victims I heard from just this last week, she is out on the stump. This is not to be hidden anymore. So the more sunlight we can expose on particularly women, but others that may be victims of this, the better it is and the faster it will stop. That's what this bill will do. I'm glad to lend my support and get a lot of others to join with me. And let me introduce Paul Mitchell, a good man from the other side of my state, but also one that cares deeply about this issue.
Thanks very much. As a graduate of Michigan State University, when I first heard about the concerns of Dr. Naster, I was disgusted. As the parent of 6 children, some of which have gone through college, some yet to go, I was horrified. I have a staff member, former staff member, whose daughter was a victim, a track and field athlete, who attempted suicide at least once. So I was happy to join this bill, to take some action, to hold leadership accountable, to make them take responsibility. As Senator Peters noted, to have a leader of an institution say, I didn't know, I don't read those things, don't even read the executive summary? Are you kidding me? A fundamental responsibility of college and universities is to provide a safe and secure environment as much as humanly possible. That should be the first priority.
then you should worry about educational opportunity. To fail to do that, to fail to take that personally, this is personal. It's personal to me. It's my institution. I graduated from there. It's just personal to everyone in the state of Michigan, and Lord knows it's personal to the victims, the survivors that expect better of that university and all universities. So yes, we're going to hold them accountable. We expect them to certify. They know about this. They're taking action on this. And action is taking that they're not tampering with, because it's more important to protect students than it is to worry about protecting your short-term reputation. Because as Michigan State University shows, eventually it comes back to bite you in a big way. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to Deborah Vagan, who's the Executive Vice President for AAU. I'm sorry, I left the W out. I apologize.
That's okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. I wanted to thank Senator Peters for having me here today, and to thank him, Senator Cornyn and Stabenow, Representative Slotkin, and Upton and Mitchell for their strong support on this issue. I'm Deborah Vagans. I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Research at the American Association of University Women. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with more than 170,000 members in every state and territory working to advance gender equity. And we know that equal access to education is essential to achieving that goal. Title IX was enacted nearly 50 years ago so that all students could have access to an education free from sex discrimination, including sexual misconduct. This groundbreaking civil rights statute has had a dramatic effect in all areas of education, opening opportunities for women in all aspects of their educational life. But despite tremendous gains, women and girls still face barriers to accessing education. And of course, one of the worst examples of that is the uptick, and although the increased recognition that sexual assault creates an unequal educational environment. It's obvious that an educational environment fraught with sexual misconduct can impede students' ability to perform well in school, and in extreme cases, prompt them to drop out. And some of these shocking cases that have been mentioned about suicide and horrible examples of the most extreme examples. Unfortunately, we know that our laws and systems are not achieving the goals they were designed to do. Our research shows the pervasiveness of sex-based harassment and violence within schools. We analyzed data that showed in high school, middle and high school, students are facing, over 50% of students are facing just sexual harassment, and that follows them into college. 60% of both men and women are experiencing sexual harassment. And we know that many schools are not disclosing incidents of sexual violence. So for example, 89% of colleges and university campuses failed to disclose even a single incident of rape in 2016. That's 89% of colleges. These numbers do not square with what research shows students are experiencing. And this underreporting can come from a variety of sources. Individual student fears of reporting to school authorities or law enforcement, the fear of retaliation, procedural gaps in how institutions respond to incidents or to students, a reluctance on the part of institutions to be associated with problems, or a combination of all of these factors. But regardless of the reasons, educational institutions have a legal responsibility to accurately and diligently monitor, disclose, and respond to sexual misconduct. And when schools do not report sexual violence, they deny its existence and thus cannot take the steps necessary to stop it. Simply put, we are failing to fulfill Title IX's promise that every student, regardless of sex, can have equal access to education. And it's up to leadership at our colleges and universities to make schools safe, and Congress, and these great leaders here, to hold these leaders accountable to our federal laws. So you've heard the high-profile stories that remind us that there have been lots of incidents on peer-on-peer sexual violence. But it's not only the sexual violence that we suffer from peers, but from school employees, faculty, and staff. And we also have heard that others in leadership can turn a blind eye. So that behavior is obviously unacceptable, against the law, and schools must respond to it and end it. And where schools fail, we need bills, legislation like the ALERT Act to strengthen our laws and our enforcement to hold them accountable. So the ALERT Act is one of the many steps Congress can take that would help. This bipartisan, bicameral bill takes strides to respond to sexual assault committed by employees on campuses. It would encourage students, it would help deal with this issue of underreporting by showing them that their school is committed to prioritizing student safety and to push schools to ensure that they are responding to incidents of sexual misconduct. And it also motivates colleges and universities to prioritize responding to sexual violence at the highest levels by the president and the boards of institutions. So gender equity is only possible if women and girls have full access to education free from the fear of violence. And this bill takes many steps towards fulfilling Title IX's important promise. So thank you very much.